It was past midnight. The city slept under the soft rain, but one woman was wide awake, scared, shaking, and ready to disappear. Her name was Sarah. She moved quietly inside her small apartment, packing a single suitcase. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing second. Each sound made her heart jump. She looked at her son, Ethan, sleeping peacefully on the couch. His small hands were holding his toy car, the only toy she could take. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to wake him yet. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. For a moment, she thought he was awake, her husband, the man whose anger had turned their home into a cage. Sarah waited. Silence again. Just the rain. She let out a slow breath. Her hands trembled as she zipped the bag. On the table, she left behind a small note and her wedding ring. The note had only one line: "I can't live like this anymore." Her heart was beating fast as she lifted her sleeping child in her arms. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. She didn't dare to look back. When she opened the door, the cold wind hit her face. Freedom smelled like rain and fear mixed together. She walked fast down the stairs, whispering to herself, "Don't look back, Sarah. Just don't." Outside, the taxi she had called was waiting. The driver looked sleepy, unaware of the storm inside her heart. "Airport. Please," she said in a low voice as the taxi moved. The streetlights passed like flashes of memory fights. Broken glass, silent dinners, bruises hidden under makeup. Her eyes stayed on her child's face. For the first time in years, Ethan slept without fear. Sarah whispered, "We're almost free, baby." But deep inside, she knew escaping was never easy. When the taxi stopped at the airport, Sarah looked around nervously. It was quiet, too quiet. She paid the driver and hurried inside. Holding her son's small hand tightly, at the check-in counter, her voice shook as she said, "2 tickets to New York." The woman at the counter smiled politely and handed her the boarding passes. Sarah tried to smile back, but her hands were still shaking. As they walked toward security, Sarah felt like someone was watching her. She looked back. A tall man in a dark coat stood near the entrance. He was staring in her direction. Her breath caught. Was it him? Had he found her already? The officer at security asked her to open her bag. She forced a smile, trying to hide her fear. The moment felt endless. When it was finally done, she hurried toward the gate. She kept looking over her shoulder, but the man was gone. Maybe it was her imagination. Or maybe not. When she finally sat down in the waiting area, Ethan leaned on her shoulder. "Mommy, are we going home?" he asked sleepily. Sarah looked at him and whispered, "Yes, baby. A new home." Her voice broke on the word new. The announcement echoed. Flight 782 to New York now boarding. Her heart started racing again. This was it. No turning back. As she walked through the boarding tunnel, she felt tears roll down her cheeks. Not of sadness, but of relief and fear of the unknown. When she reached her seat, she placed Ethan near the window and sat down. For the first time in hours, she tried to breathe normally. Then she looked to her right and froze. A man was sitting beside her. He looked calm, mysterious, dressed in black. His eyes met hers for a second. There was something strange about his silence. He smiled lightly and said, "Long night?" Sarah didn't answer. She just nodded, still unsure. The plane's engine started. As it lifted into the dark sky, Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but the stranger beside her would soon change her, life forever, and this was only the beginning of her escape. Asterisk, the airplane doors closed with a soft click. The sound felt final, like the closing of one chapter of Sarah's life. She held her son, Ethan, close as the engines began to roar. He was still half asleep, clutching his toy car. Sarah looked out the small window. The airport lights blurred behind thin lines of rain. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear. She was finally free. The man beside her sat quietly, reading a small book. His dark jacket looked neat, his movements calm. He had a gentle face, but his eyes were hard to read, deep and unreadable. Like a secret he carried everywhere. When the plane started moving, Sarah gripped the armrest. Her heart pounded again. She hated takeoffs. The man looked at her and said softly, "First time flying?" She shook her head. "No, just nervous." He smiled slightly. "It'll be fine. The sky can be rough at first, but it always smooths out." His voice was calm, almost comforting, but there was something strange about it too, like he had lived through storms of his own. The plane lifted off the ground. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling her stomach twist as the world below disappeared. Ethan murmured in his sleep. Minutes later, the seatbelt sign turned off. The lights dimmed. Most passengers relaxed. Sarah looked at the man beside her. He hadn't opened his book again. He was just staring at the clouds outside. "Do you travel often?" she asked quietly, trying to distract herself. He turned his head slowly and smiled. "Only when I need to." There was silence for a few moments. The air between them felt heavy, but not uncomfortable, more like the calm before a storm. Sarah hesitated, then said, "You sound like you're running from something." The man gave a small laugh, low and soft. "Maybe I am. Aren't we all?" She looked down, realizing how true that was. She was running from years of pain. From a man who had broken her spirit piece by piece. When the flight attendant came by, Sarah asked for water. Her hands still trembled a little. The man noticed. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Just tired." He looked at her son. "He must be your reason." Sarah smiled weakly. "He's the only reason I made it this far." The man nodded, his expression softening. "Then you're stronger than you think." Before Sarah could reply, the plane suddenly shook. A loud sound echoed from outside. People gasped. The lights flickered once. Turbulence. Sarah gripped her son tightly, heart racing. Ethan woke up, crying. "Mommy?" "It's okay, baby. It's okay," she said, her voice shaking. The man beside her calmly pressed the button for the flight attendant. "She needs an extra belt for her child," he said firmly. His tone was steady, like nothing could scare him. When the plane steadied, Sarah noticed her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The man took a tissue from his pocket and handed it to her. "Here. You're safe now." His words were simple, but something about them made her pause. "You talk like you've said that before," she said, managing a small smile. He didn't answer. He just looked at her for a moment and said quietly, "Some people need to hear it more than once." For a few minutes, silence returned. The hum of the engines filled the air. Sarah stared at the man's book. The cover had no title. It was old, with worn pages and a folded photograph inside. When he noticed her looking, he closed it gently. "It's just something I carry," he said. "Something or someone?" she asked, half joking. He smiled, didn't respond. Ethan had fallen asleep again, his head resting on Sarah's arm. She finally started to relax, but then the flight attendant returned and whispered something to her. "Ma'am, someone asked for your seat number before boarding." A man, he seemed. Worried, Sarah froze. What did he look like? The attendant hesitated. Tall, dark jacket. "He said he was your husband." Sarah's heart dropped. Her fingers went cold. She looked around. Every face seemed suspicious now. The man beside her noticed her fear. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer. Her mind was spinning. Had he followed her? Was he on this plane? She turned toward the window, gripping her son tighter. The sky outside was dark, endless, and cold. And somewhere in that darkness, she felt it, a strange feeling that her past wasn't done with her yet. Beside her, the mysterious man closed his eyes, as if he already knew something she didn't. The plane had been in the air for almost 2 hours. The sky outside was a deep gray, filled with restless clouds. Most passengers were sleeping, their faces calm under the dim yellow lights, but Sarah couldn't sleep. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since the flight attendant's words. "He said he was your husband." She tried to convince herself that it couldn't be true. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was just her fear playing tricks on her mind. But still, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The man beside her, the one who had called himself Daniel, noticed. He watched her quietly, not asking too many questions. He seemed to understand that some fears didn't need words. "You look pale," he said softly. "Do you need some water?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I thought I saw someone I knew." Daniel looked around slowly, scanning the faces near them. His eyes were sharp, observant. "You're safe here," he said finally. "No one can reach you up here." She wanted to believe that, but something inside her whispered danger never stays behind forever. Just then the plane shuddered violently. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed. A low voice came through the speaker. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts." The calm voice didn't match the fear rising in the cabin. Ethan woke up, clutching Sarah's arm. "Mommy, what's happening?" "It's okay, baby," she said, forcing a smile. "Just some clouds." But even she didn't believe her own words. The plane dropped suddenly and people screamed. Trays rattled and a cup of coffee spilled over someone's lap. The sound of thunder rolled outside, loud and angry. Daniel placed a steady hand on Sarah's arm. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Close your eyes. Hold them tight." Sarah did as he said. She hugged her son close, whispering soft prayers. Through the small window, flashes of lightning lit up the clouds, bright white veins cutting through the darkness. After a few long minutes, the turbulence grew stronger. The plane shook again, more violently this time. Oxygen masks dropped suddenly from above. The cabin filled with gasps and cries. Sarah tried to reach for a mask, but her hands trembled too much. Daniel grabbed one, placed it on Ethan first, then helped Sarah. His own mask hung loosely around his neck. "Yours," she said breathlessly. He shook his head. "I've been through worse." The plane tilted sharply. Sarah screamed, covering her child's ears. For a moment, it felt like the world was spinning out of control. Then, just as suddenly, the shaking stopped. Silence, people began whispering. Some were crying softly. The captain's voice returned, a little shaky this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through the worst of the storm. Please remain seated." Sarah exhaled shakily. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked at Daniel. His calmness seemed almost unreal. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. "You did well," he said quietly. "You didn't panic. You've protected your son." She smiled weakly. "I didn't have a choice." Daniel nodded. "That's what strength looks like." For the first time, Sarah really looked at him. His hands had small scars. His eyes looked tired, like someone who had seen too much but said too little. She asked, "Why are you going to New York?" He paused before answering. "I had to leave something behind." Sarah tilted her head. "A person?" Daniel's eyes met hers. "A life," he said simply. The words hung between them like smoke, soft, unclear, heavy. Ethan had fallen back asleep, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. The lights in the cabin glowed faintly now. The storm outside had calmed, but inside Sarah's heart, another storm was beginning. She looked at Daniel again. "You said no one can reach me up here," she whispered. "But what if someone already has?" Daniel didn't reply. He looked out the window. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a faint sunrise in the distance. He said quietly, "Then you'll need to be ready for whatever waits when we land." Sarah stared at him, unsure if his words were comfort or warning. Outside, the sun began to rise, painting the sky gold and pink. But Sarah couldn't feel its warmth. Somewhere down below, someone was waiting, and he wasn't ready to let her go. Asterisk, the storm had passed. But the air inside the plane still felt heavy. People spoke in quiet voices, their laughter nervous and tired. Flight attendants moved slowly, offering water and calm smiles. Sarah sat in silence, her hand still resting on her son's shoulder. Ethan slept peacefully again, as if nothing had happened. But Sarah's thoughts refused to settle. The words of the flight attendant echoed in her mind. He said he was your husband. Her heart beat faster. What if he was waiting at the airport? What if all this freedom was just an illusion? Daniel sat beside her, his book open again. But he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the same page, lost somewhere else. After a few minutes, Sarah spoke. "You said you're leaving something behind. Is it someone you love?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath. "Someone I couldn't save." His voice was quiet, but full of pain. Sarah looked at him. "What happened?" He hesitated, then said, "I was a police officer once. Years ago." That surprised her. He didn't look like one. "Not anymore. I had a family," he continued. "A wife and a little girl. I was working on a case. A bad one. I made enemies. And one night when I came home, everything was gone. My house. My world." He stopped talking. His eyes stayed on the page, but his mind was far away. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. He gave a small nod. "Sometimes I think running is easier than fighting ghosts." Sarah looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "I've been running too, but my ghost wears a wedding ring." Daniel turned toward her. "Your husband." She nodded slowly. "He wasn't always like that. When we met, he was charming, smart. He made me feel like I was the only person that mattered. Then he changed. I thought it was stress, work, but the shouting started. Then the silence, then the bruises." Her voice cracked. "I kept thinking he'd go back to the man I married, but that man was never real." Daniel listened without interrupting. "When he hit me the last time," she continued, "Ethan saw it. He cried so hard, and I realized I wasn't saving him. I was teaching him fear. So I left. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of the engines." "You did the right thing," Daniel said finally. "Not everyone has that kind of courage." Sarah smiled weakly. "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like running with no place to go." He closed his book and looked at her seriously. "Freedom starts that way. It's not peace at first. It's just noise and emptiness. But one day it becomes quiet." His words stayed in her mind. After a while, Sarah stood up to take Ethan to the restroom. The aisle was narrow, the air dry and cool. She washed her face in the small mirror, staring at the tired woman looking back at her pale skin, red eyes, fear still hiding in every line. When she returned to her seat, Daniel was gone. She froze. His seat was empty. The book he'd been reading was lying there, half open. "Excuse me," she said to the woman sitting across the aisle. "Where did the man sitting here go?" The woman frowned. "I'm not sure. He just got up a few minutes ago." Sarah picked up the book. The cover was worn and soft, with no title. She opened it, and inside was a folded photograph. Her breath caught. It was a picture of a small town, a church, and behind it, a signboard with the name of her city. How did he have this? Her hands trembled. She looked down again. There was something written on the back of the photo, a single sentence. "Sometimes fate brings two lost people together for a reason." Sarah looked around the cabin, but Daniel was nowhere. She felt her heart race again. Who was he really? Why did he have a picture of her town? Just then, the announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in 30 minutes." Sarah held the photo tightly. The sunrise outside was turning golden now. But her thoughts were darker than ever. She didn't know what scared her more, the husband waiting for her below, or the stranger who had just disappeared above the clouds. The plane began its slow descent. Through the window, Sarah could see the outline of the city below, tiny lights glowing under the morning haze. For most passengers, it was just another landing. But for Sarah, it felt like the edge of a storm she wasn't ready to face. Daniel's seat was still empty. His book lay where she'd found it, the photo inside now hidden safely in her jacket pocket. Every minute that passed made her heart beat faster. Where did he go? Why would he leave the book behind? "Mommy, are we there yet?" Ethan asked, rubbing his eyes. "Almost," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Just a little longer," intercom buzzed. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The lights brightened. People buckled their seatbelts and sat upright. Sarah looked around one more time, no sign of Daniel. Then she saw it, 2 rows ahead. Near the emergency exit, a man stood facing the aisle. He wore a dark coat, the same one she'd seen earlier at the airport. Her chest tightened. Her throat went dry. It can't be him. It can't. The man turned slightly, and her fear deepened. It was him. Her husband. His eyes met hers for a split second. Cold, sharp. Sarah's breath caught. She turned her face toward the window, pretending not to see. Her fingers clutched Ethan's hand tightly. How did he get on this flight? Her thoughts raced. She had used cash, fake details, everything to hide her trail. Yet somehow, he had found her. The captain's voice came again. "We'll be touching down in 10 minutes. 10 minutes." That was all she had. Then suddenly, a soft voice came from behind her. "Sarah." She froze. Slowly, she turned around. Daniel was standing there in the aisle, calm as ever. But now his face looked different, more serious, more aware. "You need to stay calm," he said quietly. "Don't look back." Her voice shook. "He's here, isn't he?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, he's been on this plane since boarding." Sarah's heart pounded. "You knew?" "I saw him enter," Daniel said. "I didn't want to scare you, but he's been watching you the whole time." Well, tears welled in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to be sure who he was," Daniel said. His tone changed deeper now, firm. "And I also needed to keep you safe." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small badge, silver worn, but clear enough to read. "Federal Security Agent." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're not," he nodded. "I'm not just a passenger." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The man who had been quietly reading, comforting her through the storm, was a government agent. Daniel leaned closer. "Your husband is wanted for multiple charges, including assault and illegal trafficking. We've been tracking him for months. When you bought your ticket, you became part of an ongoing case." Sarah felt dizzy. "You were watching him." "Not me?" "Yes," Daniel said. "But when I saw you, I realized you were one of his victims." The plane jolted slightly as it prepared to land. The noise of the wheels folding out echoed through the cabin. Daniel's voice softened. "Listen to me. When we land, stay seated. Don't talk to anyone. I'll handle this." Act. Sarah looked toward the front. Her husband had moved closer to the aisle. He looked impatient, his jaw tight. She could feel his rage even from here. "Will he hurt us?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Not this time." The plane touched the runway with a loud thud. The wheels screeched, and everyone swayed forward slightly. People clapped softly in relief, but Sarah sat frozen, staring straight ahead. When the doors opened, Daniel stood up immediately. Two uniformed officers entered from the front, walking calmly down the aisle. Her husband turned, confused, then realized what was happening. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice sharp like a knife. "What did you do?" Ethan woke up crying. Sarah hugged him tightly, eyes shut. The officers reached her husband in seconds. "Sir, please remain seated." He resisted, shouting again, but Daniel stepped forward and pulled him down firmly. The cuffs clicked. The passengers gasped. "Ma'am," one of the officers said to Sarah gently, "you're safe now." Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. As they escorted her husband away, Daniel turned back to her. "It's over," he said softly. "You don't have to run anymore." For the first time in years, she believed it. She looked at Daniel, the stranger who wasn't really a stranger, and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled faintly. "I told you. Sometimes, to escape one danger, we walk into the right one." Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, bright and golden. The storm had finally ended, but her new beginning had just begun. Asterisk weeks turned into months. The chaos of that flight, the shouting, the handcuffs, the fear had slowly faded into memory. Sarah now lived in a quiet town by the coast. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Every morning, she walked Ethan to school, holding his tiny hand, watching him smile again. That smile was her reward, proof that the storm was over. Her new life was small but peaceful. She rented a tiny apartment above a cafe, where she worked part-time as a server. The owner, Mrs. Hill, was kind and never asked too many questions. She liked Sarah's calm nature and her soft voice. Every day after work, Sarah sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the waves crash gently against the rocks. She often thought about that day on the plane, about Daniel. She hadn't seen him since the airport. After her husband's arrest, he had disappeared quietly, like a shadow that had done its job and moved on. The officers had told her Agent Daniel Scott is currently on another assignment. But deep down, Sarah felt he was more than just a government agent. He had appeared exactly when she needed someone the most and vanished the moment she was safe. Still, sometimes at night she could hear his voice in her memory. Sometimes, to escape one danger, we walk into the right one. One cold afternoon, months later, the sky turned gray with light rain. Sarah was cleaning tables when Mrs. Hill called out, "Sarah, someone left this for you." It was a small brown envelope with no name. Just her first name written in neat handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something else. A familiar object. The old book. The same one Daniel had left behind on the plane. Sarah's fingers trembled. She opened the paper. It wasn't a letter, just a short note written in clean, bold handwriting. "Freedom suits you." Her eyes filled with tears. She turned the book over. Inside, between the pages, was another photograph, this one of her and Ethan, taken at the beach a few days ago. Someone had captured the moment she laughed as her son ran along the shore. Her heart raced. Who took that photo? She looked outside the cafe window, scanning the street. It was quiet, only the soft rain and passing cars. But she felt it, a presence. Like someone was watching, not in a threatening way, but gently, protectively. She smiled. Maybe Daniel was still somewhere out there, watching, making sure she was really free that night. After putting Ethan to bed, Sarah sat by the window again. The waves shimmered under the moonlight. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of the dark. She opened the book and read the first page. It wasn't a novel. It was a collection of short quotes and reflections. On one page, Daniel had written something in pen. "Survival is the first step. Living is the next." Sarah traced the words with her fingers, whispering softly, "I'm learning to live again." She looked at the sleeping child in the next room, peaceful, safe, dreaming of a world without shouting or fear. That was her miracle. As the clock ticked quietly, she closed her eyes and breathed in the calm air. No alarms. No footsteps in the dark. No more running, just peace. The next morning, she went to the beach early, before sunrise. The horizon glowed faintly with orange light. She stood there, feeling the cool sand under her feet. Ethan ran ahead, laughing, chasing seagulls. Sarah looked at the endless sea and smiled. The wind brushed through her hair as she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." Wherever you are, a plane flew overhead, cutting through the golden sky. Its shadow crossed the water for a brief second, then disappeared. Sarah watched it until it vanished into the clouds. Her heart felt light, not because she knew where life would go next, but because she finally trusted it to lead her somewhere good. The camera would slowly pull back, showing the mother and child by the ocean. The waves erasing every old footprint, and as the final line of narration would, "Play softly. Some strangers don't enter our lives to stay. They come to set us free."